Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we'll be continuing the manga tournament with Witch Hat Atelier versus Wotakoi. I'm going to start with Witch Hat Volume 2, and just like always, we're going to jump straight into the compile scores. Characters, I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. It is incredibly consistent with characters. There's a lot of depth here, even with the characters that felt archetypal in the first volume. They are getting a lot of explanations behind their characters. The only thing that I'm really going to ding Witch Hat for as far as characters go is I think we are either introducing a few more characters or not taking enough time to develop the ones we have. We had at the beginning of this volume the 4 apprentice witches together where they're in mortal peril, and this was a really good time to flesh out the relationships between some of them, and we did that to a certain degree. We're still very much focusing on Coco and Agate's relationship. So Agate is the character who's on the cover of this volume, and they are foils for one another. They're opposites in a lot of ways, and so we got to see a little bit of that developing. But also within this initial conflict, we got a little bit from Tisha as well, another one of the witches. However, Rika, I don't know how to pronounce this name. It's Richeh. They have these lovely fantasy names, but I have no idea how to pronounce it. So I'm going to go with Rika. Rika was in this same conflict with them and did play a minor role in it, but I didn't get a sense of who her character is. And I felt like this was probably the best shot we were going to have at getting that development within the story, and we kind of didn't get that done in this kind of one-off adventure that they went on together. So I'm a little bit worried, are we going to develop this character a little bit more, or are they going to be someone who kind of fades into the background? We introduced another character in Olrugio, another senior wizard who's in this, who's in the same atelier as the rest of the group here, but he's off on his own wing. He doesn't really disrupt them very often unless he's looking for components, but he's also meant to keep Quifrey, the master wizard, the one they're all apprenticing under. He's there to keep him in check and to make sure that he's doing what he's supposed to do. And of course, when he finds out about Coco, then there's this big threat of like, well, we need to go inform people about what's happened because what you've done here is not allowed. And he threatens to take action to basically turn her into the wizard police, but then almost immediately backs down because of course we can't be having that go on right away. And this seemed like an odd choice because there did seem to be something in the first volume where he'd already talked to someone above that station and kind of cleared it, or at least they were like, well, he's going to do it anyway, so like let's not even worry about it. So I don't know, that was kind of odd, but I do really like Olrugio. He plays a big part in the second major story that's going on in this volume. Characters were all very solid. I'm just worried that either we're spreading ourselves a little too thin to where we couldn't get much about this last character, or we're just not going to develop that character. Ultimately, they're not going to play as big a role in the story as the others might be. Atmosphere is a 10. This gives me classic, like, Record of Lodoss War, almost these feelings of like classic fantasy manga. It definitely has a very vibrant, very well thought out world. Everything from the costume design to the way that the glyphs are written, the way that magic works, and how it's all logically consistent. I'm sure you could take any glyph written out in here and deconstruct it according to the rules of the first volume and see how it's working. They introduced the idea of magic items, and magic items still work off of a glyph system. It's just that those items are imbued with the glyph as well. And they introduced that a little bit in the previous volume with the shoes that already had the levitation glyph on them, and you just put them together. So it's leading to some very cool concepts that are further explored in this volume, but all maintaining that very lovely magic system, all maintaining this very interesting, playful world that they've created. Writing and art got a 10 out of 10. This was my biggest takeaway with Volume 1, is that this is probably the most beautiful manga that I've ever read. There are moments here where they're just introducing an item or introducing a concept, and in a normal manga, they would just maybe have an image of that thing and have a little box in the corner that tells you about it. Here, it's like they're taking a page from some sort of manuscript of or record of these items and their properties, and it's like lovingly recreated with like folded corners, a lot of the same rope work and line work that was done in the previous volume. We're not playing around as much with the panel borders in this one. I didn't notice as much of a play there as I did in the first volume, but it's still there. And so just across the board, everything about this comic is very eye-catching and very lovingly detailed. And I really think it is the most beautiful thing I've read in a very long time. Plot, I'm giving an 8. Again, well above average. This continued kind of back burner story about these evil wizards that are manipulating things behind the scenes. I did like the payoff for mentioning the basically magic police earlier on in the volume. So that does play a role later on, and I felt like that was a good bit of foreshadowing for how this volume ended. I know that Japanese manga are not created for trade in the way that American comics are. So I don't know if it's just lucky that this ended where it did or if it was by design, but this also ended with a very big cliffhanger, which we'll talk about later. And I felt like that was a good way of pacing the plot and making sure that you kept interest and were keeping engaged in the story. Intrigue is also getting an 8. I don't feel I'm as invested as the comic wants me to be with this rogue wizard backstory that they've got going. I say backstory. It's not really backstory. It's more like something that plays in the background. It comes up in these quieter moments between these adventures. However, the idea of the magic wizard council that is looking for anyone breaking the rules being made aware of Coco is something that's very intriguing, does really catch my interest, because I know it's something that's going to have to play out right now. I think my biggest issue with the evil wizard thing is that this is the long game, right? This is the thing that we're going to spread out across the whole comic, and so I know that in any individual issue it's not really going to develop that much. We're going to get a little bit of them in the background doing sneaky things and like maybe manipulating something, but it's so slow rolling that I know it's not going to have payoff in the next volume, let's say. But this idea of the magic wizard police coming in is going to have to be something that's immediately addressed and does grab my attention a lot more immediately. For the logic / relationships, I'm also giving it an 8. I feel the biggest development here is learning about Agate's backstory, and we get it in a very indirect way, where there's a moment where she's thinking about her own motivation and her own reason for doing things, and we get some of these conversations from her past, some of these things that she's been told about, some of these things she's been told as she's been growing up that really paint a picture of why does she have the attitude she does? Why does she work so hard? Why does she try so hard to prove herself? And I feel like that relationship between Agate and Coco is going to be one that's very strong and very well explored at perhaps the expense of some of these other relationships. We're going to definitely highlight that because they are such interesting character foils for one another. Their opposites really bring out the elements of their personality that make them shine so well. And them playing off each other and learning from each other is one of the key ideas of this book that makes it work so well. And the thing that I am most engaged in, most interested in, is seeing the relationship between these two develop, seeing how they work together. They're going to have to work together. And already it's starting to, Coco's innocence and her lack of experience, her lack of understanding of magic, the things that she is bringing from her own past and her own viewpoint are starting to influence Agate for the better. And you can also see Agate's influence with Coco of her perfectionism, the bar she sets for Coco, where Coco wants to be better, Coco wants to do more, because Agate is such a perfectionist, because she tries so hard and does so well. And it's the core of the comic that really makes it work. It's just that as a result, because that dynamic is being explored so much, I feel like some of these other characters are maybe not as strongly developed as they could be. My overall enjoyment for this book was a 10 out of 10. It was something that was never boring. I was never looking ahead and seeing how far do I need to get to the next chapter, or how much longer do I have to read this. Always engaging, always beautiful. The world is so well realized and so engaging. The opening story was a little bit more fluff. It was a little bit more fluff and technical mixed together. And so I enjoyed the technical side. The fluff side was fun. But the second story, the introduction of Olrugio and the second mission that they go on, or the major mission they go on at the end, was really what made this volume shine. And from there, from beginning to the end of that bit, I was on board. It was amazing, lovely. Everything about this comic is great, and I would highly recommend picking it up. Witch Hat Atelier Volume 2 ends up at a 63 on the Copile score, which is equivalent to a 9 out of 10. So it's going to get 5 stars on Goodreads. It is definitely something worth picking up. Let's see how it stacks up against Wotakoi. So Wotakoi Volume 2 is actually, I think I might have mentioned this in the first one, it's actually 2 volumes of the manga that were brought out in Japan. We put them together, but they end up being the equivalent, close enough to a manga volume that I'm counting them together. I did mention I wanted a stronger relationship between these two, a little bit more explanation there, and for a larger plot to start developing. And it delivers on both of those, kind of. Let's get into it. So for characters, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. The characters are always entertaining. They're always fun. The relationships all feel genuine. There's 3 major couples now, and they all seem to have their own feeling to them, their own minor things that they're dealing with to try to get their relationships either moving or to keep them on track. Atmosphere, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I enjoy the references and the different, especially at the beginning, there were a lot of other like manga references, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Akiji. I like any time that they make these nerdy references. They have a compendium in the back, or they have a reference in the back to all the different things that they mention. But I'd say 8 times out of 10, I'm already familiar with the reference, and so it feels like a comic book, romance comic made for me. And so that always feels good. Writing and art, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. So most of the art in here, most of the situations are not super demanding. There are those moments where the artist is trying to mimic another mangaka's style. But generally they're just drawing the same 4 or 5 characters, office settings, things like that. So there's nothing outlandish or wild. The panel layouts are all pretty standard. It's very detailed and very good for what it is. It's just there's nothing about it that requires pushing the envelope. I also do like the times where they are in the video game, because you get to see all their video game characters. So those are different ways that they have to kind of do different art styles and things as they go through. But I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. I do think it addresses a little bit of my concern with the first volume that felt aimless, that felt like just a bunch of vignettes put together and several pages of just like four panel comics. That still exists in here, but there is a through line in this one for half the volume and then for the second half, because again, it is two of the Japanese volumes put together. The first half deals with Narumi and Hirotaka's date, which was the big setup for the first volume. The second volume deals a lot with Hanako and Taro as they talk about, they have a story about the way they met back in high school, I believe. It's the big exploration for the second half of the volume. The issue is these more overarching plot lines, these longer connected stories are still peppered with these one-off stories. Even knowing that it's doing that, it can be kind of tough when you start up a volume, or you start up a chapter rather. You start up a chapter and you get 3 or 4 panels in, you're like, oh, this is continuing the story. They're back on the date. Okay, this is the next part of that. Instead of maybe putting all those together and then having the one-off stories be at the end. I don't know if that would have been better. And there's at least one instance where one of the one-off stories was talking about them watching horror movies, and part of the date is they get stuck in the haunted mansion. I feel like that one was there purposefully to set up the characterization, the way the characters all react to horror films and horror situations. So that wouldn't have worked quite the same way. It's trying to do the thing that I wanted it to do, which was to have more cohesive plotting, but it's still putting in between that these one-off stories, and so it still ultimately feels disjointed. Intrigue, I gave this a 7 out of 10. This is not really a story where there's a lot of mystery. There's not even a lot of stakes in the comic. Each of the couples deals with some minor issues, but they're never really serious. They don't ever really feel weighty, and I don't think they're meant to. I think this is supposed to be more of a light, fun, like, look at these awkward nerds getting together and like having fun and enjoying their date, or doing silly things. So I don't know if I really want more stakes. I don't know if I really want more drama inserted into this, but it does feel like there's not a lot like pulling you back into the story. There's not a lot driving you forward. I could pick up a volume of Wotakoi, read it, have a great time, put it down, and then, I don't know, I feel like I could go a month or two and not feel the need to pick up the next volume. I'd pick it up and have fun, but there's nothing like compelling me to move forward in the story. Anytime there are those moments where a character is like, does she mean that she doesn't want me to be over here? It's like almost immediately undercut. They're like, oh, no, I meant this. Like, don't even worry about it. Let's talk about relationships. Again, I mentioned that these two, I wanted to see a little bit more of their relationship and to get more of a sense of the idea that they actually wanted to be together, because I felt like there were some really mean moments in volume 1. Taro was just taking things too far, and it was clear that Hanako did not like it. She was not happy, and he just kept pushing, and I was like, should these people even be together? The second half of the volume deals with their backstory, and we've toned it down a lot. I feel like we've found a comfortable spot where they're teasing, they're like making fun of each other, and they're getting at each other's throats is reading more as a loving relationship and just like joking around and having fun. I don't think we got there in volume 1. We definitely got there in volume 2. And so this volume is doing what I wanted to do. Relationships, I gave an 8 out of 10. Lack of any real stakes is part of it. It's all very nice. It's all very fun. And again, the different couples feel unique. It's just lacking maybe a little bit of depth, maybe a little bit of stakes that I was talking about before. My overall enjoyment for Wotakoi Volume 2 was an 8 out of 10. It does still feel a little disjointed. You finish up a chapter, even the ones where it's like, oh, to be continued, even the ones where it ends on a cliffhanger, kind of, it's nothing so serious that it's like, I have to pick up the next volume. Oh, I've got to read what's going to happen. What's going to happen with this date? What's going to happen with this relationship? Oh, now he's found out this bit of information. That doesn't ever seem to happen. And so, again, I like reading this. I could see myself picking this up and continuing to read and enjoying the story, taking it slow. I don't see myself like picking up every volume and like having to get the next one and having to read the next one and like really wanting to get through it very quickly. And again, I don't feel like the story really is conducive to that anyway. It feels like a much more relaxed, laid-back story. Wotakoi Volume 2 ends up at a 55 overall for the Compile score, which ends up being a 7.89 out of 10. So this is going to get eliminated this round. I still highly recommend it. It was still a lot of fun. It's just that between the art and characterization of Witch Hat, there's so much going well in Witch Hat that it's really hard to compete. And so Witch Hat Atelier will move on to our semifinal round. Witch Hat is going to go up against Blood on the Tracks, which should be a very interesting matchup because these are two completely different styles of comic, and it's going to be very hard, I think, when it comes down to it, which of these is a stronger story. That's all for today. I hope you're enjoying the manga tournament and looking at these different matchups of comics side by side. If you're new to the tournament and need to go back and catch up on what's been going on, I'm going to put the playlist up here for the manga tournament. Take a look through there, see if there's any matchups that you're interested in. Down here is another manga related review that I've got going. Let me know down in the comments if you are a fan of either of these manga or both of these manga. Tell me what you think. Hope your reading journey is going well, and as always, take care.